Everybody wants to be involved in football, as I say, until they're involved in football. Those guys that are working at the elite level, it's a full-on 20-hour day job. The environment, when I say intense, is an understatement. I was assigned to scout Spain. They know they're playing Spain. We don't need to tell them or show them how good Spain are. When Iniesta would get the ball or another player in midfield, the minute they turn their shoulders to face forward, it was a trigger. If you want to be successful, it's important that there's a lot of alignment. If you want to have turmoil, then start off on the wrong foot.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. Joining us today is Mick McDermott. Vast experience, coached alongside Quieroz for Iran in the 2018 World Cup. Also talks about his time at Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and most recently in Northern Ireland with Glentoran. Phenomenal experience. I hope you enjoy. Before you start, please like, please subscribe. Thank you so much for the work of Modern Soccer Coach. If you want more free content, head over to modernsoccercoach.com. As always, thank you. And here's Mick. Enjoy. Mick, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really, really excited to chat.
Thanks for having me. It's been a long time. I'm glad we eventually met up again.
It's been a while. We're going to talk about coaching under pressure and the highs and lows of it. It's such an interesting time, I think, where coaches are dealing with a lot of pressure at all levels. We've done a few episodes of this at different aspects. This one, from a head coaching point of view, a leadership point of view, once you go into a club for the first time, everyone wants to sell a vision, long-term view, philosophy, all these great words, but you've got to win on Saturday and you've got to win next Saturday. How do you deal with the short term and the long term and managing them both at the same time?
I think the starting point has to be with your first meetings. When I went into the club back in Belfast, there was initial meetings with the investor, the owner, the shareholders who, what was our vision. But with any job that I've been involved in, it's discussions with the board or the committee or the president or whoever's in charge to discover what their intentions are. What do they want? And to ask as many questions of them, because many times it's the other way. Okay, coach, what are you going to deliver for us? And everybody, if you ask the most basic question, they'll say, we want to win the league. Well, that's nice to say that, but so do the other 16 teams in the league, or so do the other 20 teams in the league. They're all thinking the same. So I think at the outset, you've got to get a clear understanding of what their intentions are, their ambitions are, their expectations are, and do they match with what you're bringing to the table? And it may be a case of, this doesn't match what I can bring to the table. This doesn't match the realistic situation of the club. And maybe it's not a match from the word go. But once you're in the door and you've come to your agreements, if you have agreements based on those first meetings, then it's more clear because there's realistic agreements and sort of targets, if you want to say. But a thing that keeps you seeing once your feet are on the ground, win, loss, or draw, you've got to evaluate those exactly the same and keep yourself stable. Keep yourself, you evaluate a win exactly the same as you evaluate the loss. With methodical, you go through the game, what went wrong, what went well. Because if you keep it about the system you're developing, then you don't get massive highs and you don't get massive lows. So I think that's a big part that I try to do. Okay, we won the game, right? Okay, enjoy it, no doubt about that. But now Sunday and Monday, how do we evaluate that, wrap it up, and now let's move on to the next one. So it keeps you more grounded and more, I don't want to say focused, but it keeps you working towards your long-term intentions. Because if you spend your life in the tunnel of a week and Saturday, you lose on Saturday and it's mayhem. Change the training on Monday. We need to work this on, change the analysis. So if you're always chopping and changing, which I've worked with some head coaches like that, where lose a game, chaos, win a game, 2 days free. So in that turmoil, you have no consistency. And consistency is what your staff needs. Consistency is what your players need. And consistency is what your owners, directors, committee, president wants to see. And the hope is with that consistency also brings results, because at the end of the day, you have to get results.
Do coaches shoot themselves in the foot then by, I mean, obviously everyone wants a job when it opens up and everyone will go into that interview. Very, very few coaches are getting recruited. 70, 80, 90%. They're going to send in their application, hopefully get that job. But when they go in, they're going to sell the dream. And then you're saying there is that if the expectations are misaligned, then there's an issue. But can coaches in that initial interview phase, should they be a bit more aware of how they're selling themselves and what they do?
Yeah, I think, look, now when you go for a job, more so as the head coach, when you're going in as an assistant or a fitness coach or a medical professional, it's a little bit different. Usually it's an interview. Are you competent? Do you meet their profile, personality-wise, competency-wise? With the head coach nowadays, you got to go in with the full presentation. They want to see, who you are, which they've already got past that if you're at the interview phase or at the presentation phase, but basically who you are, where you've been, what you've done. But now they want to, that's the what. Now they want to see how you're going to do stuff. It's all right to say we're going to win the league, we're going to challenge for trophies, but now the how. So they want to see your methodology, your game models. Some people have different terms for these things, but they want to see how you're going to do this. If that aligns with what their long-term intentions or goals are, then you probably get the job. To me, you can only present what you're capable of doing. But again, the first part of that, maybe even to get to that phase of presenting, it has to be discussions with the decision makers. Very few coaches will end up in that situation. Usually that's an experienced head coach who's being headhunted, and they can sit down with the owners and the president. And you're right, younger coaches, they want the job. But the more experienced coaches can go in and see if their vision is aligned with the club's. And if it is, let's move forward. They don't have to sell themselves as much. It's about the alignment and the vision. But for the younger coaches, they have to present and ask questions, discuss, go through their presentation. And if it meets with the vision of the club, well, you move forward together. But at least from those initial meetings, there's agreements. Look, things in life only move forward with agreements, mutual interests. It's no point you having this vision of I want to do this, and the club has a different vision, or half the board has a different vision. And that's the other thing to consider. What are the intentions and expectations of each board member? What are the roles of each board member? Because you could have a board of 7 or 8 people, and the chairman might say, okay, we're going to do this, but you've got 3 or 4 others that are not in alignment. So it's important that everyone, if you want to be successful, it's important that there's a lot of alignment. If you want to have turmoil, then start off on the wrong foot. But yeah, I feel for some of the younger coaches. I don't consider myself old, but I've been around the block a couple of times. I feel for some of the younger coaches of the scenarios they're walking into. But that's the challenge we face.
Very interesting. If a job opens up, it's usually, unless it's the perfect succession plan, which rarely happens in today. A job opens up, there's something that's happened that's wrong, results, environment, whatever it is. When a coach goes in there, you're not going to be aware of, if it's results, you're not aware really of the source unless you've been able to do real due diligence of an insider. But most people aren't aware of the culture they're walking into. So you talk about the board there. When you go to that board, members, is it a bad move there? You say starting in turmoil. Is it a bad move to go in and say, I've been here a week, by the way, guys, in terms of Manchester United, about what you hear, by the way, the infrastructure here is inadequate in this way, and this way, and this way. I mean, guys, how would you maneuver around that one?
Well, I think in those initial meetings, or if you're reviewing the club from afar, for example, sometimes, in our experience of taking over a club in Ireland, you're reviewing the workings of the club from afar, from documents and the structures. So sometimes that happens. But if you're already in, you've met with the board, now you're in post, there's a general agreement usually where the board will give you time to say, look, review what we have, because unless you're in somewhere like the Middle East, where they may allow the head coach to just say, right, there's 10 staff out and you bring 10 new ones. they don't even give them time. They just say, okay, coach, bring who you want. So there's countries that are like that. But let's say normal working environment, you get hired, you arrive with one assistant coach, maybe two, and now the agreement likely will be spend time evaluating our staff and structures, and then give us report back in a week, 2 weeks, a month, and we'll move forward from there. So when you go in, as I have done as the manager in Northern Ireland, or as a part of a staff coming in as an assistant or a fitness coach, you always work with people. The club that I worked at in Abu Dhabi for 5 seasons, I had 8 managers. So those 8 managers brought 8 staffs with them. So I managed to work with, along in 5 seasons, 8 different groups of staffs, and we worked along together. So I've been on the other side of it, where I was in the club and people arrive. And to me, the number one thing is to be transparent and open, communicate. And if you're in a position of seniority, you're the manager, you allow people to do their job. But in the first meeting, you have to meet with the staff, medical staff, your coaching staff, whoever's on the ground, and talk to them about your expectations and the intentions of what you want to do. And then the question is, how can you contribute to that? And let them speak. How can you contribute? Generally, the meeting will go, people will speak, give their input, and then you observe. But now you're observing how they behave based on the intentions and the expectations you already. So it's the agreements again. You have a framework of agreements. This is what I expect. This is where we're moving to. This is what we want to do. Then let them do their job. And what you'll find is people will contribute. They'll want to be on the same bus in the right seat, and others cannot. They cannot. And who knows what reason. I give you an example. When I moved home to take over the club in Belfast, same story. One of our targets was to take a part-time club and make it a full-time club. And that was explained to the skeleton staff that we had there. But the history, as you know, of the Irish League, Gary, was, most of them part-time clubs. So our vision was so we explained that vision in the first meetings and the expectations to accomplish that vision. And then we start working. But it becomes clear after a week or 2 or 3 or 4 that 1 or 2 of the staff can't meet that requirement for various reasons. Maybe they have another job, so it's just not going to work. So then changes have to be made. But at least I'm not making changes because I don't like the guy. I'm not making changes because I don't like him or her. I'm making changes because the agreements to move forward aren't being matched. So I think if you base it on that, then it doesn't become a personal thing. It becomes can you do this job to take us where we want to be? Do you have the competencies? Do you have the desire? Do you have do you want to be part of this journey, basically? And sometimes they cannot, and they move on. So I think that's what happens even at the highest level. I've worked with some great head coaches. They go in, they do the same. They meet with all the staff. They explain the vision. They explain the expectations. And then they start working. And if it becomes apparent or clear that some of them cannot, then eventually they get reassigned or moved out and replaced.
The pressure on results, it's always going to be there, always kind of has been there. But I think we're seeing this new, with clubs trying to do, like you said, move from a level of professionalism and compete at a higher level. The level of investment has to be there as well. Does that commercial pressure add to where, if you're going to say, listen, everyone's going to stick their hand up at the start of the year and say we want to do that, but then football clubs don't run on profit most of the time anywhere in the world. So I guess when you need to keep getting people to invest and the ticket money isn't where it is, I guess, how should a coach go through that there and manage it?
Well, the pressures of, especially if you're dependent on prize money, which some clubs are, smaller clubs in Belfast, we weren't dependent on prize money, but to get into Europe and qualify for Europe could mean, I think the first 2 years we were there, we qualified twice. We also won a round. So I believe, from memory, I believe that brought in probably around €800,000 in prize money across. So when there's a target like that to hit, then it becomes a drive, the pressure, to get into one of those 3 or 4 places to qualify. In most leagues in the world, there isn't substantial prize money unless you're in the Premier Leagues of each country. So it can be the competitiveness and the drive, to the stress, the pressure to finish in the top 1, 2, or 3 to qualify for the playoffs. It's real no matter which level you're coaching at. Because if you're coaching an amateur team and you're trying to win the league, the pressures for them, it's all relative. But yeah, once you get up into those where budgets are concerned, if you don't qualify or you don't bring in, you're going to have to make cuts next year. Which players? Because you're managing people's lives. I'll give you an example. Not getting in my own world, not qualifying for Europe one year. We have to make decisions that summer. I mean, immediately, basically that next week. Who can we keep? Who can we not? Who needs to move on? But these are, like I said, you're dealing with people's lives. Some work players were from outside the country. You have to release them and send them back home. They have wives and children, and so that also adds to the pressure of the job, because the decisions you're going to make are affecting people's lives. But as you said at the start of the question, the majority of football clubs are not making money, and they have to keep looking for investment. We were fortunate in Belfast to have an owner who was committed to the club. There's a few clubs in Northern Ireland at the minute that have investors and are committed to the clubs. And that's been a game changer for the league. And that's common. You see around the globe now, I'm sure you're familiar, Gary, with this multi-club model. You'll see a lot of, especially American companies, corporations that are buying up percentages of clubs, smaller clubs in France and Portugal and Spain and Lithuania and Denmark. So there is investment needed to keep these clubs going. And does it add to the pressure on the club? Absolutely. With the additional investment comes the additional pressure, because the additional investment raises the expectations of the fans and the board and the president. So once the additional money comes, sometimes they think, extra money, we must win now. Doesn't work like that.
Yeah. You've also, with that extra money, I mean, people can put their prices up because they know there's investment. So you can be priced out of things, but also people can be more careful of how that's money spent when it comes to the big bucks. So then you've got this, well, what do you're getting it internally, I'm sure, from owners and committee members. Then you're getting it externally from fans who don't particularly know the ins and outs of where the money is and what the spend is or the spend available, etc. But it's always kind of been there. Again, back to United. Ragnick came out and told the fans, this is like, you don't know how bad this club is. Mourinho's done it as well. I remember he had was eggs and omelets analogy years and years ago. I thought it was one of the great lines. Is that a really bad move for a head coach to try and bridge the gap of information between the internal and to the fan base about why they might need to be a bit more patient?
Well, look, I think it is a risky one unless you've got a really secure contract. So I don't know, but I would imagine Mr. Mourinho's contracts were pretty secure in terms of the legalities of them. But look, when you've got a profile and a history as a manager like that, he sees things that aren't right. And he feels he's going to, but yeah, it's a risky move, especially for a younger, to start being critical of their own club setup or structures or investment strategies. I think from my feeling in that situation, from reading, and again, being a complete outsider, it seemed to be there was some frustration at that moment at United with Mourinho that he wasn't fully in charge of transfer targets and, transfer the recruitment process. I think there was a sporting director at that moment, and I don't think he'd been used to that world. I think he'd been used to making the decisions. I want this. So I think maybe that was a little pushing a little button to send a message that, I'm not fully in charge here. But look, we've seen it with managers using different tactics when things aren't going well. We have too many injuries. Our squad isn't big enough. I mean, you can go through the list. Sometimes it's like, here we go again. Um, so I think sometimes it's a tactic used to get a little bit more longevity, but also to send a message to the fans that here, this is the reality. Because sometimes it is true. There's managers there with 6, 7, 8, 9 players are injured, and the expectation is, my question is always in those situations, but why are they injured, or what type of injuries do they have? My background coming from sports science and physical education, I'm always curious, well, what type of injuries? If you've got, 7 or 8, 9, 10 players out with hamstrings and groins, well, I think I'd be looking at somebody within what's the training structure look like? Not just blaming the injuries on the matches. So I think there's a lot, but yeah, I see it's a risky tactic to start having a go at your own club. And I wouldn't recommend it.
Staying on that, then, the sports science piece, and obviously your background and your expertise in it. When you go into the Glens and you say, all right, well, so we're going to professionalize it, and obviously that's going to mean, I would imagine, a massive amount of investment on that physical side, which involves staffing and software and tech and all that there. What does that look like, or what did that look like? How did you build that?
Well, we were starting from, like I said, the goal was to take a part-time club, transform into a full-time club. And that took us about a 2-year period. And we still had players under contract that were still part-time contracts, and some of them moved on because they had other jobs and we had to replace them with. But one of the first things we did, Gary, was we upgraded the facilities in the club, because the part-time way of thinking was, training at 7:00. Players would walk in at 6:45 with their bag. They'd train, they'd get in their car, and they'd go home. No gym, no shower, no prehab, activation, physio work, recovery work. But my answer to that would be, but why would they come early? There's no facilities here. Why would they stay late? There's no facilities here. So the first thing we did was we made a decision to convert an old sort of ballroom, meeting room, bar room, like a social, in the belly of the club. We converted it into a big gym. At that time, it was probably the best one in the league, but it became a home. We upgraded the dressing room. So we gutted the dressing room and made it something like you'd see in the US with all the lockers. And it's an old building. So we tried to create a modern, illusion in this reality of almost 100-year-old building. But anyway, we upgraded the dressing rooms. We upgraded the performance center. We upgraded the pitch. We upgraded the dugouts, because we wanted to give an environment to the players at least. So naturally, what tends to happen, players started to arrive an hour early, an hour and a half early. We had a game area, table tennis tables. And so we wanted to create a home, because in the past they had no home. They came in their car, left in their car, they went back, So to try to create even the culture of being in the club, wanting to be in the club, and slowly, I'm talking weeks, all of a sudden now you've got a buy-in that here, okay, we want to be here early, we want to stay late. So that was our initial. The other was staff. Like I mentioned earlier, we had no full-time staff at all. So we worked hard we managed to find a brilliant, because of my background as well, I knew the importance of medical staff. So I found a brilliant physiotherapist who came in and was with us. He had been with Ulster Rugby for a number of years. And so I knew I needed to get somebody on the medical side, because, again, buy-in from the players, if they're being treated well. Again, why would I come to the club early for treatment if I don't have a physio? So again, we tried to create the environment where the players want to be there. So again, added the medical staff, added another assistant coach. And then we didn't invest in the bells and whistles like technology before we had the basics. Because to me, the environment is much more of a requirement or a necessity than having fancy tools and bells and whistles and gadgets. So that was our initial step. create an environment for the players so they could feel safe and secure inside. Because when they have a home inside, it helps to shut out the noise when things are going great or things are not going so great. At least they feel like they have a bit of. The other thing we added was a place to eat, so they could eat before training or games. They could eat after training and games. Again, to create a home for them inside the club, and we did that right from the first days.
Hello, coaches. We take a quick break here. Thank you so much for all your support with all the Modern Soccer Coach content. If you are enjoying this interview and enjoying the content, please do me one massive favor. One, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel. And two, if you wouldn't mind giving it a like or giving it a rating on the podcast, making a comment below about maybe what you enjoyed about it or future recommendations for interviews. All of the engagement really, really helps spread the word of the channel if you don't mind doing that. And if you want to go one step further, please recommend it to your coaching community, your coaching friends. It means a lot. Thank you so much for your support. We're almost at 50,000. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Back to Mick.
You mentioned rugby there, and obviously Gaelic, like two of the two sports that have made absolute strides from a physical component in the last 15, 20 years. And I don't know about. I mean, I've seen bits of Irish League, but it used to be that part-time footballer that was working. How much has it grown with that full-time? You mentioned the investment coming in. What's been your experience over the last 5 years of the kind of athleticism side of Irish League?
It's. I would go home and watch the odd game now and again. Over those 20 odd years I was away, and I was always disappointed in the game, but not in the level of the player. I thought there was always some good players, but the surfaces and the conditions. But I would say in the last 5 years, it has come on tremendously. You know, a lot of clubs have put down plastic pitches now. We still play through the winter, which I think is a hindrance to us. But in terms of the conditioning levels and the knowledge of the players and the knowledge of the coaches and the type of training, it's jumped exponentially in 5 years. And you see the shape of the players. You see, I mean, even the part-time clubs are in 3 and 4 days a week now. But what was really interesting for me, we played in Europe in 2020 against FC Tórshavn from the Faroe Islands, and they played in Belfast against. There was one game back then because of COVID. There was no home and away, so we played FC Tórshavn, and my assistant was driving their team manager back to the hotel after they came for the pitch inspection. And he said, "So you guys..." Now, I had watched FC Tórshavn about 6 of their matches in the run-in, and I said, "I don't know how we're going to beat this team." I mean, they were really talented. So my assistant asked their GM, are you full-time or part-time? He said, "Oh, we have a few full-time players, but most of the players are part-time." He said, "How many days a week do you train?" And he said, 6. And he said, 6. He said, "Yeah." He says, "We train 3 mornings around 6 a.m. and we train 3 afternoons, and then we have the match." And you realize that smaller nations around Europe have been doing this for years. And that's why they become highly competitive. You know, the Faroe Islands, small nation, they have a lot of Danish players that come over. They maybe find them a job to help them with their salaries, but they're training 5 and 6 days a week. So they consider themselves footballers who also have a job. In the Irish League, in the history, it probably was, I have a job and I also play football. But that has changed. And I got to give a lot of respect to the players now. I see them, even the way they look coming out onto the pitch. The part-time clubs, like I said, some of them in 3 and 4 days a week. Some of the clubs don't have their own gym facilities, but they have deals with local gyms where the players can go. Then the full-time clubs, you know, Glentoran, Linfield, Crusaders was sort of semi-full-time. Larne, league champions. And Larne, in terms of their infrastructure and their facilities, is no doubt the best in the league. And I think the level of preparation, we just called it that, the level of preparation of the teams across the board, from analysis, training, sports science, it's like night and day from what it was even 6-7 years ago.
Well, staying on different cultures then and kind of moving away from Irish League and Irish football, 2018 World Cup. I mean, that must have been a hell of an experience. The level of competition, the World Cup is the elite of it. It was a brilliant World Cup from what I remember. What does that look like on the inside, Mick? Like, what does that level of pressure, intensity in that training camp in those opening weeks? What does that look like, feel like?
Well, I'd been with Iran in the qualification for the 2014 World Cup, but then I left for a few different reasons, family reasons, and I moved back to Dubai. So I went through the qualification phase, and then I didn't go to the tournament in Brazil. Then in 2017-18, I didn't go through the qualification phase because I was with a club in Iran, but I joined in January on the final run-in to go to the tournament. So I'd been through a qualification in 2014, missed the tournament, but then I rejoined Iran and went. So a lot of things had changed when I went back, 4 years later. But I'd always kept in touch with the staff because I was working in Iran with a club, and I saw the staff regularly, saw the head coach, Quieroz, regularly. So I knew things were improving. But when I rejoined the staff, things had come a long way. The players had changed, the shape of the players, the level of thinking of the players. The Iranian players are men, big boys, strong, committed. So when I joined, but yeah, the work environment on the run into the World Cup, and I kept a log, and I can't find it, but it was 100 days before the final camp. So the final camp is usually 3 weeks long, sort of your final preparation phase. But we had been based in the National Training Centre because a percentage of the players play in Europe. Probably half of them were playing in Europe. I could be wrong there, but I think about half of them were playing in Europe at that time. So you can't touch them, meaning they're only FIFA windows. But the rest of the players play in Iran. And when Quieroz first came in, when I was working with him back then, 2011, 12, he had this idea to bring the players from the clubs to the National Training Centre to do their recovery work, to do their one extra day of training, and then send them back to their clubs. And I said, that'll never work. I mean, Iran's huge. It's flights. You got to fly from your club. And also the clubs will go crazy. They'll say, you're not touching my player. Anyway, with Quieroz being Quieroz and results and winning and changing the level of thinking, when we are after a few years, all of the players, this is hard to believe, all of the players on their own, voluntary, they were required to come, but they didn't. They could have said no. They'd fly after the game, they'd land in Tehran, and they'd stay in the hotel next to our National Training Centre and train with us for 2 days, fly back to their club. The first day was recovery work and medical assessments and analysis, and then they would do some training the next day, taking into consideration it's only 48 hours after a game. So, but that's how dedicated they were. These boys were committed. They were all in, but that took years to get them to that point. Anyway, the 100 days run into the tournament, we didn't have a day off. I kept a diary 100 days out, and I would take a picture of my watch I don't think I've ever told anybody this. I would take a picture of my watch before I went to bed at night, and I just kept it on my old phone, and it was like a list of all these pictures. And there it was, 3:30 a.m., 2:30, 4:30, 12, just as a memory to say, these days are 20 hours long. But that was the reality. So that wasn't for the players, that was for us, for the staff. One of my roles then was I was assigned to Spain to scout Spain. So I'd be helping out with whatever we needed, coaching wise, helping the coaching staff do this, do that, but also got to scout Spain. So I did some traveling. I went to Switzerland, I went to Russia to watch their friendlies. But then in my room at night, trying to get the analysis together, and then getting a call that we had to do something else to a team meeting, and you got back in your room winning time because we weren't a big staff in Iran. It wasn't a huge staff. So anyway, the environment, when I say intense, is an understatement. Was it too much? When you look at the results, you probably say no, because it paid off. But when you look back at it, probably needed a day off here and there because you need moments of intensity, you need moments of recovery also as a staff. But really intense. Then the tournament comes. Once you're in the tournament, you get texts from friends. Hey, did you see the Nigeria game last night? We don't know if it's daytime or nighttime. We just know it's match day -4, 3, 2, or 1. We don't see the light of day apart from when we're training with the team. So I would get all these messages. Hey, how's it going? I'm watching this game. Did you see that goal last night? Don't even have time to reply. So full on, brilliant experience to be at the tournament. A mad, intense experience in the build up to the tournament, but really enjoyable. One story: the opening game against, not to mention we were in the group of death: African champions, Morocco, world champions and European champions, Spain and Portugal. And so the first game was Morocco, and the game was in. We were based in Moscow. The game was in St. Petersburg. So, but Spain was playing Portugal in the opening game in Sochi. So part of my duties, because I was assigned to Spain, I wasn't at the Morocco game. I was in Sochi to watch Spain and Portugal. So the Morocco game was 6 p.m. and the Portugal-Spain game was 9 p.m. So I actually watched the Morocco game in a restaurant. Looking out the window, I can see the stadium where I'm going at 9 o'clock. So in the restaurant was me and a Russian family. There was a husband and wife, and it looked like about four or five kids, and the big screen. So I'm watching Morocco, Iran, and I'm watching the game, and they killed us for the first 30 minutes. And I'm thinking, oh no, keeper mates. And then there was a moment, I think we had a counter attack and we almost scored, and the game just sort of turned. And then we started, the game became more even. Morocco were a really talented team. So anyway, we get a free kick. It was injury time. Game was over, as far as I remember. 90th minute, 89th minute. And we get a free kick. And so now I'm sort of on the edge of my chair. I'm standing up. And all of a sudden, the ball gets whipped in. And it's in the back of the net. I jumped up in the air. I ran around the restaurant. Ended up on my knees, and I looking at the screen, and I just happened to look over at this Russian family, and they're all sitting like this with the who's this lunatic celebrating around winning the game? But anyway, so that was when I was getting messages from friends. I had a brilliant game, but I wasn't at the game. I was away in Sochi. So I then went to the Spain-Portugal game, and Ronaldo scored a hat-trick that game. So I got back to my hotel room and you've been in this boat doing some analysis. So I had all the analysis of Spain up to that point. And, our manager hadn't looked at it, because in a tournament, it's all about the first game. You win the first game, you deal with the first game before you even think about the second. So I had this huge file to show to the staff the next morning, but I had to ask this game, the Portugal game. So I was on a flight at 1 a.m. from Sochi to back to Moscow base camp, and I did it on the flight. We landed at about, I think I got in at around 5 a.m. And I got back to the airport, walked into the lobby with my bag, and in the restaurant was the manager, and he's alone, and the rest was like 7 a.m. eating breakfast, and I'm in my street clothes, shirt and pair of jeans. He says, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "Sochi." He said, "For what?" I said, "I was at the Spain and Portugal game." "Ah, okay." He said, "You have that ready for us around 10 o'clock?" I said, "Yeah, it'll be ready." So I scrambled up to my room to finish you're trying to get all the touches on it. And so then we presented to the staff the Spain analysis. Then we cut it, what he wanted to present it to the players later that afternoon. And then the cycle continues to match day -3, 2-1, Spain. So intense when you're in it, but really enjoyable when you look back at it.
Brilliant. Quieroz has a really, really good reputation on a tactical level. I mean, what you give a couple insights there. What's he seems to be really, really detail oriented, intense guy.
Probably the most detail oriented I've ever worked with, and probably in terms of work ethic and resilience. When I first started working with him, he was, probably 6'57", 58. Carlos is 70 now, and still, I've never met someone with the ability to continue and keep going days, weeks, months, and the resilience to deal with challenges that come up. I mean, working in Iran for 7 years, you face a lot of challenges that just pop up, and the resilience to navigate those and keep the team. It was really impressive to see on a day-to-day basis. Exhausting, takes a toll on someone, but in terms of, and then the technical acumen of someone like that, having been around the block. I mean, he's seen everything on the pitch and doesn't get flustered too often.
Brilliant. You mentioned some big names there. I mean, seeing them up close on a touchline, which player or you and jumped out and you were like, that's a different level?
I stood in the tunnel for the Spain Iran game, and we have some big boys in Iran. Striker who plays for Inter Milan at the minute. Another guy was playing at that time for, I think, FC Rostov, and we had some big players playing in Spain, playing in Russia, playing in Italy. But I stood in the tunnel, and the Spanish team came walking out, and Piqué was a giant, but relatively thin. Then came Ramos, and a monster. Like, I'd never seen anything like that before. I worked in the States, and I'd seen, basketball players, American football, but I'd never seen anything like that. But then the scariest one of all was Diego Costa. His face he didn't turn his head. His eyes were just looking straight down. Scary, big. But in terms of, looked like somebody you wouldn't like to meet in an alleyway. Ramos, physical presence, immense. And then Piqué, so probably those three were the most, that stick in my mind anyway. And then, can't remember, one of them ran past me. I can't remember. One of the Spanish players, and I thought it was my 14-year-old son. Yeah, I can't remember which player it was, but tiny little thing. So you had this extreme, But yeah, another interesting thing to see up close and live.
Yeah, even up close and live from an analysis perspective, where I mean, it's easy 2-3 days after a game when you've watched it a couple of times, and as a fan, without you make your own judgments and you're not under any heat. But as a coach, like you mentioned there about that analysis world, which is heavily scrutinized, but then I suppose the level that we don't talk about in the analysis world is how do you deal in real time situations? How do you solve it real time? I can't imagine how quick that Spain team would have knocked the ball around and created those overloads. I mean, do you remember what you were trying to prevent specifically in that game, or what you could control out of possession?
Yeah, we look. I still have the presentation somewhere. I'm sure if we meet up one day, I'll show it you. I mean, I think there was a PowerPoint I used, and it's probably 100 slides but that's for the staff, to show. And then I remember presenting that to the staff, and the manager Carlos sitting back saying, "Okay, cut that, show that, cut that, show that." And from those slides, he picked 2 or 3 things that, because one, you don't want to overwhelm them. They know they're playing Spain. We don't need to tell them or show them how good Spain are. We just need to show them a few of the details that to be aware of and to make them more ready. That was his logic. I remember one of them was when Iniesta would get the ball or another player in midfield, the minute they turned their shoulders to face forward, it was a trigger that the front run would immediately run forward. So as soon as he turned his shoulders, they would sprint forward, and it either was a ball in behind or it stretched them to get a ball into space. So at least our central defenders could realize that. That was just one idea. But the coaching point that stuck in my head, and what the manager reiterated over and over, amongst other things, but it stuck in my head and it's in my notes. You can control three things: the ball, the man, or the space. Against Spain, are we going to control the ball? No. Are we going to control the men with the talent they have? No. What's the only thing we're going to control? The space. So when they rotate and they change, it doesn't matter if it's the red shirt number 7 or the red shirt number. So follow the rotations. Protect the space was the key. Let them rotate. Let them dance. Let them move. Protect the space. And I thought we did that exceptionally well. We were too deep in the early parts of the game. I mean, our striker was on our side of the center circle, which made it, we had no out. So anyway, he recognized that right away and pushed him higher. And he, a guy called Sardar, probably one of the best players I ever saw in the air. Brilliant, even against those giants. So we needed an outlet to at least get us up the pitch. So we did well. We actually scored. It was disallowed. We still don't know why. We're not sure if it was a foul or offside, or we couldn't get clarity even at the tournament. We hit the side netting. But yeah, a good performance against a top team.
Ronaldo was obviously, like you mentioned there, the hat trick he scored. And what was the plan on him? Was it, how can you stop him in 2018 in the form he was in?
Well, and it was a really interesting. I mean, the dynamic of that game, because you're playing Portugal. All of our staff are Portuguese. Carlos, manager of Portugal at the 2010 World Cup, manager of Portugal in the past. Our assistant coach, Oceano, captain of Sporting Lisbon, played for Portugal. All of our medical staff, Portuguese, our scouts, Portuguese. Only me and one Argentinian guy who's, so the dynamic of playing against Portugal was really unique. The head coach of Portugal knows our head coach really well. Carlos, one of the guys who discovered Ronaldo, so the whole dynamic was interesting. But to be honest, there was no special, about Ronaldo. And I think it was part of, I've never asked him this, but I think it was part of our manager's tactic to not worry our players. Don't turn up the heat on this player. He's another one of the 11, and let's just deal with it as it is. But that was a game we should have won. The game started to turn for us. Ronaldo should have been sent off. He elbowed one of our players, clearly. He actually, I think he cut his forehead. It should have been a red. I don't know how the referee gives a yellow for an elbow. So he was really frustrated in the game. And then he missed the penalty. So more frustration for him. Our keeper saved it. And then it was 1-1. And in the injury time was up. We had a ball played over the top. Our centre forward went up, flicked it, and our left-sided forward was coming in. And he hit it. He was 9 yards just to the left of the goal, just the keeper to beat, because the flick went beyond their back line. And he hit it, and it hit the net. And I jumped. Everybody jumped and ran to the side. And we realized that it hit the side netting.
Oh, geez.
So would have been the first time in history that Iran had went to the second phase, But yeah, that was almost the last kick of the game. A chance that this player, he plays for Inter Milan right now, a guy called Mehdi Taremi, that would score 99 times out of 100. And he just, I think, fatigue, reaching for it, and lashed it into the side net. But yeah, again, so we didn't go into the second round, but the players made a good showing of themselves, which, they then qualified for the 22 World Cup. and they're in prime position again to. So I think they'd only ever qualified for 2 or 3 World Cups before Carlos arrived, and since 2000 he arrived, they qualified for 14, 18, 22, and they're on the path to qualify for 26. So big things were done there, and he deserves a lot of credit, which he has been. People have given him a lot of credit there. The players, especially the people he worked with there, speak really highly of him.
Brilliant. You mentioned there about the piece of, everyone who listens to that will say, God, that just sounds like a Disney World for a coach, that appreciates football and loves football, to be around that there. But then you also mentioned there about the 100 days off, and I know the pressure that goes with that, and walking into a manager who expects something right away, and you've got to dance in your hotel room to get that done. I mean, how would you advise a coach that in a positive way about, hey, listen, it's a great spot to be in, but take 10 years off your life, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's what I would say. If you want to work in coaching at the highest level, obviously clubs and national teams, there's some differences, but those guys that are working at the elite level, it's a full on, 20-hour day job. Expect to be away from your family for long spells, expect to be under immense pressure, and expect to have to move many times throughout your career. So if you're willing to, everybody wants to be involved in football, as I say, until they're involved in football, and then they realize, is this so? If that's what you want to do and you want to give it a go, but be prepared for that. I was lucky that I was in the US for 14 years. I was in the Middle East for 12 or 13, and my kids only had to change schools once in the Middle East in that time. I had friends that moved 6, 7 times in that same period. Kids changing schools, families moving, so if you're prepared for that and you know that beforehand, a great life when you're in it, but be prepared for those challenges is what I'd say to any young coach.
Yeah, just on that there, you're talking about, how intense it is. There's a lot of talk today in the world in general, not just the football world, about life balance and how to best deal with that. As a coach, as a professional coach, do you just concede that life balance won't happen, or do you think there's a way of managing it?
I think you have to try to manage it. I wasn't great at it, so I'm not an expert in this. I'm not going to say that I have the answers, Gary, because there was moments where I was not good at it at all, because you get consumed, as people I've worked with before say, you get caught up in this tunnel of game, next game, next game, next game. And, it starts to affect your family. Sunday mornings, your family's miserable. The kids don't want to look at you because they can feel the tension. But I think I listened to an interview recently with, I believe it was Graham Potter, and he did a talk on, sort of managing life and having other interests and have friends that aren't involved in football, and try to create these opportunities. I believe it was Graham, create these opportunities where you are away from football, because what we tend to do is we tend to socialize with the same people that we work with. Yeah. So the topic becomes football, and then if you go out with football, even friends who are fans, they want to talk about football. So your life becomes the same stories over and over. So it never really leaves you. So I think, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible, but you have to be really disciplined, I would say, in your scheduling of your life away from football, to make commitments to say, for example, working out. One of the first things I did, I told you, Glentoran, we built the gym, but I also wanted to use the gym. And I think in 4 years, Glenn, I think I put on 7 or 8 kilos. Wow. Because you don't have time to even take care of yourself. It's right next door. The gym is there. So your habits become consumed by the job. So I think one of the things I'd recommend to coaches or anyone, have a schedule it in. Time with your family, time with your, to take care of yourself, eat well, try to rest well. The chaos will come, but you don't need to sort of live in it every day. So yeah, do a better job of scheduling your time.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's so interesting. The piece around, I've heard there's a piece on Wenger as well. Now you mentioned that about one-dimensional. He said in reflection, he became very one-dimensional. There was elements of his personality that he didn't develop as he was a full-time, obviously at the level that he was working at. But I even saw that. I even found that myself. Yeah. When you're in the middle of it for a few years, and then you're going to a family event and you go and sitting around chatting to people, and you're like, I'm struggling chatting to someone that's not in football, and like that's not a great thing.
Yeah. No, it's not. And you end up dealing in small talk, because when you meet so many people who are strangers for the most part, you have to have your guard up most of the time. So, and you're always the same small talk. How's the club going? Yeah, okay, yeah. How's the team doing? Yeah, good. Any new signings coming? Yeah. So you're sort of not yourself for large moments. So it's nice for me, home was my thing. I love being at home. People love to be out and go to restaurants or I love being home. With the kids around and watching TV or watching a game on a Sunday on Premier League, whatever. But that was my thing. When I walked through the door, at least I could be home. So I think if you can spend time with people where you can just be. Sometimes when we spend time around people that we can just be ourselves with, that's important, and usually that's really close friends and family.
You also done developing and again that pressure world, doing your pro license alongside top level coaching. How challenging was that there, or how did you manage it?
Look, I registered for the pro license just the year. I'd taken all the badges with US soccer over the years, and then I did the UEFA license up to the A. But then I couldn't get involved in the pro because I was working continually, and you have to be there, and I couldn't take the time. So when I decided to move home, I got registered for it. It was enjoyable. Met some good people on it. I did it in Belfast through the Irish FA. Challenging in terms of the requirements, but enjoyable in terms of the people you meet and the content that you're provided. Recommend it to anyone. I think there's a cost factor now that puts it off limits for, the prices are going up continually across Europe. But yeah, a really good experience. I still keep in touch with some of the coaches that I met on that course. Some of them are doing really well, moved into different coaching jobs, Australia, Scotland, England. So yeah, recommend it.
Brilliant. All right, last one for you. 2 shirts in the background. One's definitely the Beckham Real Madrid jersey. Who's signed? And then looks like an Italian jersey. What's the story behind both of them?
That is captain of Italy, Fabio Cannavaro.
Cannavaro? How'd you get that?
He lived in Dubai. I was at a barbecue at his house one day. So I just happened to have a Italy jersey in the car, as you do. So I asked him that. I say, yeah, Walter Zenga, who was ex-Inter Milan goalkeeper.
Goalkeeper.
Was my head coach. So he lived on the Palm, Jumeirah, and Cannavaro lived on the Palm. So I just happened to be at his home one day but he played in the league for a while in UAE. So I met him a few times at different events. David Beckham. I was with Al Ain Football Club from Abu Dhabi on pre-season camp in Spain, and Real Madrid stayed in our same hotel for a week. So we would train first. We were on the pitch at 9-ish, and they were waiting to come on our pitch. So they'd all be sitting there. This was the Galacticos, the big boys, Roberto Carlos. And so I asked them one day, I said, David, he was changing his boots as I was changing mine to come off. He asked me for my shirt, but I couldn't give it to him. I said, really, really pleasant. Talked to him a couple of days, but I said, look, would you mind if I get a shirt and you'd sign it? He said, no problem. He said, I just can't sign it without a name. I can't just sign my name. It has to be to someone. I said, okay, because people sell them, I said, no problem. I said, just put to Mick. No problem, did it. My favorite player, one of my favorite players ever was Roberto Carlos. So I got my picture with him. I just wanted to see if I was taller than him. Um, you know what? We're almost identical. I thought he was bigger than me, to be honest. But so then I still have that picture. 2022 World Cup. I'm in Doha, and coming through the revolving door of my hotel is Roberto Carlos, 20 years on.
No
And
way.
I grabbed him again. I says, "Can I get a picture?" And he doesn't speak English really. And my big friend Paul Miller from Glentoran from
Yeah,
Belfast,
wouldn't they?
I don't know how he found it, Gary. He flicked through his phone and found the picture of me and Roberto Carlos from 2006, and he showed it to him. So now I've got them both side by side, like the before and after picture.
Uh,
So yeah, so it's one
uh,
of the things I've tried to collect shirts with either people I've worked with or met, or I have the Diego Maradona's my favorite in
you
the
got
corner.
Maradona. Have you met Maradona?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
met him a couple of times. He lived in Dubai and he managed in Dubai. Um,
Wow.
and first time I met him, great story. His team was playing my club. So he was the manager of Al Wasl. And I'm walking through the car park 2 hours before the game, hour and a half before the game. And just car. The building's over there. I'm ready to go in. And I walk past two parked cars, and sitting on the curb between the two parked cars, smoking a cigarette, is Diego Maradona. And I said, "Diego?" He looks up like this with the cigarette. Hey. And I go over, he stands up, and he's definitely smaller than me. Um, Shook hands, doesn't speak a word of English, just, hey, nice to meet you, whatever. So I knew we were playing them again, because home and away and blah, blah, blah. And so I got the jersey, and I had asked him, so I got a picture with him, and he signed the jersey for me. But again, another humble
Yeah.
guy. I mean, superstar. Probably my favorite player ever was him. Yeah.
Mick, top class. Wow, I've loved it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can dig some useful things out of it. I'm not sure how much, but hey, at least we got to talk.
All right, coaches, I hope you enjoyed that. Brilliant insight from Mick and phenomenal experience and words of wisdom alongside it. So I hope you enjoyed it. Massive thanks to Mick for coming on. Before you shoot off, please give it a like, and please make sure you subscribe. Thank you so much for the support for Modern Soccer Coach. Really appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.